All right.
Yeah. All right. 3, 2, 1.
Welcome in the Life in the Red podcast. That's our working title this week.
I like that.
We're in a period of transition right now with what we're going to call the podcast. The working title is Life in the Red. Could change, might not change. I guess you just have to keep tuning in to find out. I'm Chris. There's Parker. There's Steve. We are live. Well, as of right now, we're live. We're not going to be live when you listen to this, but it's 4:21 p.m. Thursday afternoon, Lincoln, Nebraska. We are 9 days away from Husker football. We are 1 day removed from the report coming out that Nebraska is involved in NCAA investigation into the improper use of analysts in its coaching, on the field coaching. I don't know if you call it bombshell report. I guess you would. I don't know, surprising report, but
a little too much analyzing going on.
Little too much analyzing going on. Trev Alberts and Scott Frost came up and met with the media briefly yesterday, Wednesday, after practice, before players and assistants spoke with the media just to address the situation, basically present a united front. Didn't answer a whole lot about the investigation, what was going on there, or anything like that. Can't, because as they say, it is an ongoing investigation. So couldn't say a whole lot about it. But yeah, that was the news of the day, of course, in Lincoln, Nebraska yesterday. And now I guess a little over 24 hours later, here we are. We're trying to kind of sort things out and see what might be next as far as this thing goes.
When I lean in, it's because the blender's going and I got to kind of struggle to hear you. But
Sipple's at Scooters again this week.
Yeah, Sipple works at Scooters now.
Yep.
Sipple lives at Scooters.
It's a fairly nice existence, I have to tell you. I don't mind.
There's worse ways to go.
You know what would be hilarious is if one of our dedicated podcast listeners can figure out what Scooter's location you're at and then just like sidles up next to you next week during the podcast.
Yeah, we don't want to get it.
Hey, are you guys recording a podcast?
No, sir, we're not.
I keep a very low profile. I'm in a back booth. So there's no, I'd say nobody knows I'm here. It's like
it's like you don't exist.
Right. It's like I don't exist. Okay.
Yeah.
The bombshell report. What was Parker? And you saw it first. Well, we probably saw it simultaneously. What was your reaction?
Well, I think the thing that at first I was a little bit confused as to what was actually being reported. And then I guess we can take it piece by piece. The active NCAA investigation, I don't know about you, Sipple, but like I don't mind admitting that I had not heard a single word about that. Like
yeah, well, that's interesting. I had neither, and I don't know it's sort of, I don't know what our readers think of that. Baz, had you heard anything?
Yeah, I actually knew all about it a couple weeks ago. I just didn't say anything. I figured, but I wanted it to be a surprise for you guys. You know, I thought it'd be a fun little nugget to have after it.
Yeah,
it was stupid. It wasn't the best question. I should have.
You consulted with Brett McMurphy.
Yeah, I was actually at some of the workouts last spring. We were all unmasked and breathing on each other.
It was a really bad question.
It was.
I just wanted to get it out there that you were in the same boat.
I guess what I'm getting at. I guess what I'm getting at though is like I don't think
that was beautiful.
Yeah, you guys didn't know?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of things that happen, especially things that are not that are I guess what you would call like negative stories. Like when Luke McCaffrey transferred, there was this sort of thing floating around for like weeks and weeks before that about like, is he going to transfer? Is he not going to transfer? There were people posing as if they knew exactly what was happening. There were people and they didn't. And then there was people that, like there's always this, it's around here, at least it always seems like there's sort of like, you hear bits and pieces of things and all that. And you're sort of always sifting through stuff. And the investigation itself, the analyst thing, really was like clear blue sky, more or less. And so it was sort of unique in that way. And then you sort of start trying to put it together of like, okay, what does this mean? Or obviously, then talking to people, working sources, all of that, and you're trying to sort of put it together. And I thought it was very interesting that of the three elements of the story, the first being the investigation into the improper use of analysts, the second being the practices that were held last spring during COVID, and then the third being the Oklahoma fiasco and Frost's role in that. The active NCAA investigation was like the least talked about of those three. I just found it very interesting how it all sort of unfolded.
Well, you guys, and Baz is, I mean, he's been around a little longer than you, Parker. The NCAA stuff, the NCAA comes in and does investigations of schools fairly often.
Yeah.
There's minor violations at schools all over the country. I'm not suggesting these are minor, but it's not. I just want to, so people understand. The NCAA can investigate a school without us knowing anything about it, and it happens a lot.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
just things that don't even rise to the level of news. That's just the way it is. Now this, I'd say, duh. I guess it does. But as I wrote yesterday, it does, particularly when a coach is under some degree of fire. When he's a high profile coach, especially a high profile coach has some pressure to win. Then I guess it becomes much more relevant. If he was, let's face it, if Frost was 26-6 right now, and Bill Moose was still the AD and everything was running smoothly, chances are we never would have heard this.
Yeah, maybe that might be true. Although if it ends up being, and we'll see what the NCAA finds, but if it ends up being a level 2 violation,
Right.
Normally that gets that, the NCAA will put something out about its findings. And so I think this is one, to me, is probably one, not guaranteed.
Would the NCAA put it out if nobody asked?
Normally they release findings for level 2 and level 1.
Okay.
So,
okay.
but not for but it depends. It depends on the exact nature of what the findings end up being, and certainly I think you're exactly right, Sipple. I mean, certainly the extenuating circumstances around the program itself and around Scott Frost and just the 12 and 20, I think, informs a lot of the conversation on this, right?
He's vulnerable. I mean, yeah. I think what 12 and 20 does is create vulnerability. And a place like Nebraska, it's not a good place to be vulnerable because there's a lot of people that are interested. And it's one thing to be vulnerable at UTEP, and it's another to be vulnerable in Lincoln. And Frost is really vulnerable right now. And Baz,
Vulnerable in El Paso was the name of my country album from a couple of years ago.
Baz, and just to be clear, you didn't know about any of this, right?
No, I knew all about it. We've already covered that. I helped run the workouts last spring during COVID.
Sipple's planning on being vulnerable in El Paso for his entire retirement.
In my 60s will be spent in El Paso, very vulnerable.
Yeah. So Sipple, then it gets sort of interesting to where the way that it was reported, the way the story came out, it sort of puts all of the local reporters and definitely some national folks too in this position where not only are we then reporting on an NCAA investigation, but then this other stuff too, to where I guess there were a couple of new elements of reporting added to territory that we've already sort of covered, right? The off-campus workouts last spring and the Oklahoma fiasco. And it just all sort of shaped up to be, I thought your column sort of hit on this, that whether or not it turns out to be a very impactful day in terms of the NCAA and potential sanctions, it felt like an impactful day for Frost at the very least.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's at the very least, it's a distraction. I mean, it depends. I don't know, it's sort of an awkward conversation. If you're a Frost supporter, you might look at it and say, oh, yeah, he's being aggressive. I mean, he's using analysts and consultants, much like they do in the SEC. Nice work. If you're, and and if you're getting investigated, that's just a byproduct of your aggression and deal with it. If you,
Uh-oh.
Oh, our friend froze up on us.
Columnist. He was just getting ramped up too.
He was too. He was about to launch into it.
Technical difficulties at Scooters.
This is what happens when you fly by the seat of your pants doing the remote podcast. Sometimes you run into issues.
He's deep, but he's very far into the life in the red.
Yeah, he's yelling at his computer right now, thinking we can hear him.
He's ensconced in red.
He's cloaked in red.
Cloaked in red, and now frozen indelibly on your screens if you're watching.
Frozen in amber, cloaked in red.
Yeah. Fossilized in red.
Did you just kick him out, Parker?
No, his internet must have gone out. So he'll join back in here in a minute. I just to pick up where he left off, I could sort of tell where he's going, and we've talked about this. Like, if you're not a Frost supporter, then it's like another log on the fire,
Yeah.
And if you could look, I think you can look at this either way. Then from the sort of relatively objective standpoint, there
we go.
Here he is.
Oh, there he's back.
You're back.
yeah, every so often we lose connection and we're back. Okay.
Every so often we lose connection. It can be one of the songs on Baz's album, Vulnerable in El Paso.
Right. That's the first single off the album, actually.
So Sipple, we heard as much of the beginning of that thought process as saying your aggression, much like the SEC, if you're a Frost supporter.
Yeah, if you're a Frost supporter, you might spin it this way. Yeah, he's being aggressive. He's putting out more coaches, allegedly, to coach up the guys. This is all sort of allegedly at this point. And he's trying to get more coaches on the field to coach the guys, like they do in a lot of places, particularly probably in the SEC, where it's pretty standard practice. It's pretty standard practice in basketball too. I talked to one former coach yesterday who was a Mid-American Conference school, and the coach told him, look, you're not supposed to be coaching, but you're going to be coaching. It's fairly standard. And now if you're in the anti-Frost camp, if you think that he's not the right guy, you can use this to illustrate sloppiness. This is just like the penalty issue, Steve. He's been sloppy, and this is an example of his sloppiness. I was getting text messages from guys during my show saying that. So it just depends on what camp you're in, and it's not such an egregious matter that it can't be spun. It can be spun.
Yeah, it can be. I think it's interesting because I think fair minds, until the NCAA makes some sort of decision, whether they don't find anything worth penalizing, or if they find a very minor, if they have, Brett McMurphy's report said they have a lot of video evidence. So if there's an instance or two where an analyst is coaching on the field and it's really not, it's not like there's hours and hours of it, that's one thing. If it's rampant, that's probably a slightly different conversation in terms of what the result of the investigation might look like. Or maybe they determine there's just not enough there to do anything with. So in the meantime, you're going to get those sort of varying opinions on how bad this is. Certainly, like someone was asking me about Arizona State the other day. It's like, that's a lot different. I mean, you're talking about flying kids in a dead period and hosting them, hiding them in a suite during football. Like there's a real conspiracy there. It's like
working them out at a park.
Yeah, right. It's a little bit different than that. I think we can agree. And I think we can also agree that if they get hit with sanctions, no matter how minor they are, that's not good,
No.
Like Nebraska at this point, like they need all the help they can get. And so like Michigan a few years ago had to decrease the number of off-field staffers that they had. And they lost some recruiting hours and they lost some practice hours. Like those are not margins that Nebraska wants to be losing on. You know, that doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but it's not great. It's sort of like talking about Turner Corcoran missing some practice time during camp here, right? Like, is it the end of the world? No, it's not the end of the world, but you can't say it's a good thing. You know,
No.
He's a young guy who needs the reps, needs the experience, and he's not getting it. So if something is taken away or limited, you know, by the NCAA in all of this, there's just that part of it. There's no way to, the outcome, there'll be no way to spin that it's good unless nothing happens. Or maybe if
Go ahead.
No, that's what I was gonna say. I mean,
But
Okay.
the other part of this too is like the Illinois game was already a big game. Now, how much does that get ramped up? You know,
Bigger,
there was, you know, it was bigger, and it was already big, and it was the first game of the season. Now, you know, you talk about distractions, whatnot. What if Nebraska goes up there and lays an egg like they did last year against Illinois, and you know, gets beat by a couple scores and is never really in the game? Well, guess it was a distraction, wasn't it? Coach is distracted. They've got this hanging over their head. Now what? So there's that part of it too. And if Nebraska goes out there and plays well, wins by a couple scores on the road, then it's the exact opposite. Well, these guys are able to put it behind them. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, and yada yada yada. So yeah, we already heard guys say like this is the biggest game of the season for Nebraska right out of the chute. They have to perform well. And now you throw this on top of it. Not that this has anything to do with what's gonna happen on the field, but just another layer that you got to add to this trip to Illinois.
Yeah, it's really now that part of it. The will the team be distracted? Maybe it won't. Maybe it will. Who knows? It's really that kind of stuff I have found over the years in our roles is hard to read. I mean, I just like people ask you, and I think I sometimes sort of pretend like I know, and then I kind of stop myself and like, look, I don't know that. I don't know what the locker room's like over there. Never been in it. I don't spend appreciable amount of time around the team. Who knows how they'll react? I mean, over the years, you try to gauge it with people you talk to, and it's sort of hard. Teams have different personalities. They have different leadership dynamics. What you hope is that the players will be relatively unaffected. But the thing I wonder mostly is, will Frost be distracted? I mean, at the end of the day, that's the leader. I mean, he's got to set the tone. Now, he can't really afford to be distracted. Or he can't, when he's around his team, he can't be distracted. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he handles this. I mean, I have to think that a good leader can handle something like this.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have to think that.
No, go ahead, Parker.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, and it's one of those. It's sort of like a, you know, it's like you say, Sybil. Every team has different leadership. Every team has a little bit of its own personality as a group, and we've seen. I guess you would say over the past, not just 3 years, but I've covered 4 years on the beat. This will be my 5th. You know, we've seen different layers of shortcomings in that regard over the past few years, right? Where there was sometimes, like 2017, obviously, it just felt like that team was beat halfway through the season. Last year was a little bit different. You know, last year they were able to sort of, they got it going a little bit, and then they didn't handle success very well. That was one of the things that Frost talked about, was like, you beat Penn State, turn around and play terribly against Illinois the next week. You know, you beat Purdue and you turn the ball over, you know, 4 times, and then you lose in Minnesota. You know, you turn the ball over early against Rutgers, let them hang in that game. So it's going to be very interesting to see what sort of temperament comes out. Not only would you think that that it's possible in this regard, perhaps, for the players to avoid being distracted, it's not probably affecting them day to day very much. Some of them, based on the report, perhaps were interviewed at some point, but that could have been months ago.
Right.
So then the next question is, like, do they play with a little bit more motivation even because
Well,
of
maybe
that.
here's the thing. I know we talk about feelings a lot. Some of this has got to be rooted in game plan and preparation.
100%. Yeah.
If you feel as a football player, any kind of athlete, that you're well prepared, then you're more confident. If you feel like the game plan is strong and we have an edge, we feel like we have an edge going into this, that's going to take care of a lot of the issues we're talking about. How do they feel about their head coach being investigated, the way it's affecting him? A lot of that is determined, some of that is determined by just what the coach puts in place for you. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
in game plan, if you feel really good about the game plan, yeah, we got a good plan. That can help a lot. You know, I think the conversation in some ways can't be all about feel. It has to be rooted in something more stable than that.
Sure, but the kids have a better idea than anyone else outside of like family, I guess, about where coaches, whether it's Frost or assistants or whatever, like about where they're at. I mean, they spend so much time together, especially this time of year.
Yeah,
That those guys are
for
gonna
sure.
know. Those guys know if a coach is dialed in. You know, Mike Dawson talked about that a couple of weeks ago about just the importance of always showing your kids that you're engaged and that you know what's going on and that you're on top of your stuff. And so and if you see that, I feel like if I was a player, which I'm obviously not, but if you saw your coach was embattled in some way, whether it was this or, you know, some other sort of problem or whatever, and you saw that they had their head down and they were grinding and all of that, like, I think there might be an added layer of motivation to that.
Sure, absolutely.
This guy's
Especially
fighting.
especially if you feel like that you're well prepared.
100%. Yeah. But yes, And if that's the sort of the second element of that is that not only do you see that, you know, someone who you care about is going through something, but also despite that, they're fighting for you.
Absolutely.
That's someone you can go to work with.
Covering this program for 25 years, I've thought about this a lot. Being a head coach would drive me crazy because so much of what you do isn't about winning that Saturday.
Right.
Being a head coach takes you so many different places that don't involve beating Illinois. You know, it's why Rick Neuheisel, one time I heard Rick Neuheisel talk. He used to go to the office at 4:30 when he was the offensive coordinator, head coach, because from 4:30 to 7, he could concentrate on football. And then when 7 a.m. hit, all hell broke loose. Deal with parents, you might deal with an NCAA matter. You might God only knows what you're dealing with 150 guys. And then, you know, he couldn't really focus on football. I don't even know if I could do it.
It provides the last 24 hours or, you know, 30 hours or whatever it's been, provides a little interesting wrinkle on what Scott said in I can't remember if it was Indianapolis or the first day of camp when he said, I want to coach football. You know, I don't want to deal with all the other stuff. I want to coach football. Well, there's been some days. Yeah.
Now, in this world now, what are coaches dealing with? The NIL, a lot of that. Maybe they don't. Probably different ones do it at different levels, but there's a lot that can distract you. I think it'd be just funner to be a running backs coach.
Well, maybe unless you're Ryan Held and you got a bunch of freshmen in your running back room and nobody's a real proven starter or anything. I don't know how much fun that would be. Should we talk a little actual football? That seems like a good transition point.
I think we're ready for that.
Are we? Yeah, I think we're ready for. Are you ready for some football?
Hey,
Baz is working at a high level today.
He is.
I'm locked in.
He's working through his fatigue very well.
Well, yeah, it's like you got to lock in a little harder. You know, you're trying to push through some stuff.
He's living life in the red.
Yeah, I'm living life in the red. You know,
What struck you yesterday, Baz? What struck you yesterday?
It was actually like our super newsy day, like outside of the NCAA stuff, which was kind of weird. We got Matt Lubick and we got Greg Austin, both guys usually pretty good for some some sound bites, and a couple things came out of that. One, Matt Lubick said they're going to be healthy at tight end for the Illinois game, which compared to last week at this time when that was maybe a pretty big question mark, that's good news for Nebraska if that means they're indeed going to have Travis Vokalek back. And I thought Lubick had the quote that kind of made you chuckle, where he said, if Austin Allen misses a practice, it's not the end of the world. And he just kind of goes like this, So I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah. And, then same thing for offensive line. Greg Austin talked about Turner Corcoran. Looks like he's going to be ready to go for Illinois, and that's a guy that's kind of been in and out, battling some stuff, left tackle there, being dinged up a little bit, but seems like from what we heard yesterday that Nebraska's going to be in a pretty good spot health-wise going into this game, which obviously, like Parker said earlier, you need all the help you can get. And you've got Turner Corcoran available, and if you've got Travis Vokalek available, those two guys are going to play a lot of football for you that you maybe didn't think you were going to have a week ago.
Yeah. See, what I find sort of interesting is it seems like they've had a good camp, and even a good camp from the standpoint of no real serious injuries.
Yeah.
I mean, we thought for a little bit that Vokalek might fall under the category of serious. I'm not sure I'd say that right now. They had the thing about yesterday that was interesting to me is I had felt like they were actually generating some degree of momentum in this camp. And then that news hit at kind of a curious time. Maybe somebody else felt like they're getting a little too much momentum in camp,
Maybe. Maybe.
So I think they've
Put
had
on
a pretty
tinfoil hat here.
Yeah. You need to sit at Scooters with a tinfoil hat on.
Yeah, I like tinfoil. It's a good look for me. It's yesterday was newsy from a football standpoint, and mostly good newsy.
Yes.
It was, yeah. I think so. Another one of the interesting elements we touched on just a little bit was the running back group, and the early on, like in the spring, there was a lot of talk about Gabe Ervin and sort of the first impression he made, and I think it seems like he'll be involved at some level. Marquise Stepp, that was like you're saying, simple, another piece of good news when camp started, that Marquise Stepp was further ahead than maybe they thought he was going to be. But the last couple of weeks, there's really been a lot of buzz from the coaches about Savion Morrison and the way that he reworked his body in the offseason, that he committed to, he talked a couple of weeks ago about going to bed earlier and eating healthy and all these things that have helped him get back to, he felt like, he said he feels back to what he felt like when he was a senior in high school, or even better. And that was, he was one of the most electrifying running backs, certainly in the state of Oklahoma and really in the region for Edison High School. When his high school career, he rushed for more than 5,000 yards. And so that picture is really interesting to me. Like, I don't know if they're going to be really good, solid, average. Like, it's hard to say until you see it with your own eyes for a few weeks, what you think of that group. But I find that to be a very intriguing trio, and then we'll see who else can get in the conversation. But that trio of Stepp, Ervin, and Morrison is very. I'm very, of all the things that will be great about being in Champaign next weekend and watching and covering a football game, I'm very interested to see what the running back picture looks like.
Please allow me to add some context.
Let's do it.
Here's some context. Okay, they're playing Illinois. Last year, Illinois saw a team that the leading rusher for Nebraska was a wispy quarterback, Luke McCaffrey, who ran 26 times.
My God, I forgot about that.
Yeah, he ran 26 times. The second leading rusher in that game for Nebraska was a minuscule slot receiver who was thrown into running back duty because Dedrick Mills was sidelined.
Sure. Yeah.
He ran 6 times for about 60 yards. That's what Nebraska had at running back last year for Illinois. Nothing. They basically had nothing at running back. Well, I shouldn't say that, because Wandell is a pretty good running back who wasn't really a running back, though.
Right. They had their best running back was a 5'8" slot receiver.
Yeah, so McCaffrey ran 26 times for 122 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson ran 7 times for 60. He was the second leading rusher. They're going to have a lot different look at running back than they did against Illinois last year.
That plays into something else Craig Austin said too. He's asked about the run game. He said, I'm excited to showcase it. And he was talking about the downhill part of that, which has been touched on over the last couple of weeks here, and how that might be a new element in this running game. And he talked about he wants his guys to be confident, and you've got to be confident in what you're doing. And he feels pretty good about their ability to run the ball downhill. And he talked about it being an attitude. He had a great quote yesterday, which reminded me of when I drive you guys to various locales around the Big Ten. He said, there's no greater joy than taking a man against his will from point A to point B, which is how I feel when I'm driving.
Yeah, you've been doing that for a few years now.
Yeah. So
That's like when you try to get Sipple to go out for dinner on Friday night on the road. It's always against his will.
It's against his will. But yeah, again, it's going to look different because of what they have in the running back room. And it's going to look different because of what seems to be an attitude shift in the way they want to run the ball. More downhill, more physical style. Marquise Step with the great quote last week. They want to get that blankety blank going downhill, So, and if they come out and establish that, that's another reason that makes this Illinois game so critical. I think they can establish an identity, right? Like you can come out and establish, you know what? We're going to line up and we're going to play maybe not power football in the traditional sense, but play downhill football and be physical and run right at you.
Right.
Powerful.
Now, here's the question. Here's the question. Okay, they're talking about it. Will those words turn into action, or will they just
see? Yeah.
Or will they just, what's the word for it? Revert to past tendencies. It's the running back conversation's interesting because it appears they now have the running backs to perform like they're talking about. We don't know for sure, but it seems like they do. And then the other side of that equation is, what if Nebraska is as good as, our colleague Sam McEwen is of the mind that this could be a rushing defense. It's a top 15, top 10 rushing defense. Now, I don't know that I'd go that far, but he thinks they could be a rushing defense that allows 3 yards per carry. I mean, that would be incredible to me if that happens.
Especially considering the last few years.
Yeah. What if that's the picture? Wow, Nebraska's running the ball and stopping the run. That would be way different than it'd be way different.
We'd be saying hello.
But Parker, you have said, don't you think, Parker, their strength is up front?
Defensively?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's probably their deepest. People talk about the secondary a lot, and certainly they have a lot of experience back there in Markel Dismuke and Deontay Williams and Cam Taylor-Britt. I think the defensive line should be perhaps the best position group collectively on the roster, offense, defense, or otherwise. I mean, they've got 7 guys that they feel good about playing. They've got at least a couple in there who have this sort of projection left that, they have the chance to be really disruptive players. Now, we haven't seen that fully from Ty Robinson or from Casey Rogers, from Damian Daniels. We've seen it in flashes from each of them. But that's the next step is any of those guys challenging to be that sort of, game-changing player up front. But even still, by the second half of last season, and frankly, for most of the season, they were relatively stout against the run. They went from they're big enough, they're rugged enough to stand up and hold their own in the Big Ten. I think now it's safe to say at this point. And then last year, they've just played for the most part pretty fundamentally sound. And so to simplify it, the challenge this year is to play fundamentally sound and then also make the big plays, and that's where, they did a really good job of bottling stuff up. For the most part, those guys were where they were supposed to be. The linebackers was the best we've seen in the past few years about linebackers being in the right spots, filling the right holes, preventing big plays, making sure tackles. Now, can you create big plays on top of just being, where you're supposed to be?
Yeah, they only how many turnovers did they produce? They forced 2 fumbles and had 5.
7 turnovers in 8 games last year. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not enough. That is just flat not enough. And they had 13 sacks, which in 8 games isn't very good, especially think about it, Indiana at 25, Iowa at 22, Nebraska at 13. You can't have Indiana doubling you up in that category. So yeah, the explosion is explosive athletes. They're not loaded with that. I think they're pretty good across the board, but you don't see a first round pick. You don't see a I can't identify a lineman like Malik Collins that someday might sign a $6 million contract. That may be, but he's not readily identifiable right now.
Yeah. All good stuff. All accurate stuff. Anything else we need to touch on before we get out of here? Let's see if we'll get back to his 14th cup of scooters.
You know what? I've had 3 cups of coffee in an hour.
My God. In an
My
hour?
goodness.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I just drained one.
Jeez Louise. You gotta find a new spot to work.
Speaking of draining one, Baz, are you gonna get the shoulder bag like Kizé Tominaga had while he got off the plane and was draining threes over at the
Our guy Kesey walks off the plane, walks into Hendricks, knocks down 5 3-pointers in a row, hanging a satchel over his shoulder.
You're kidding me.
No, there's video of it up on the Husker basketball Twitter account.
With the satchel over his shoulder.
Yeah, he's got Hoiberg rebounding for him. He just walks in, baseline, corner, cash, 5 in a row. Hoiberg stands there like this.
And
says,
Fred
like,
couldn't
"What's
even
up?"
do. Not even Fred could do that. I don't think.
No chance. I'll tell him that the next time I see him. Fred
Dipple says you
can-
couldn't make 5 in a row.
Dipple says you couldn't make 5 in a row from the corner, Fred. Prove him wrong. So, yeah, little ways off from hoop season yesterday, but Kisei's in town and he's getting buckets already with a bag on his back. So there's
The satchel on his shoulder.
That's a satchel on his soldier. That's another song on my album. Getting buckets with a satchel on my shoulder. That's from Vulnerable in El Paso. Due out this fall. All right, guys.
In El Paso.
On that note, we're gonna wrap it up. The Life in the Red podcast, working title. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.